Your first project is pretty straightforward. Choose a poem from Blake's Songs of Innocence or Songs of Experience and provide a reading of that text to an audience of your peers, which are undergraduate students who have read Blake's poems and who want to learn more about them. But your reading is more than just an interpretation of the text, a discussion of what the poem might mean. Rather, what you're trying to do is to provide a reading of the poem through the perspective of a specific critical issue, and how the critical issue can shape the way we understand what we read. Here's what I mean. You're going to choose one of Blake's poems and then one of 6 critical issues. Issues such as authority, subjectivity, culture, ideology, history, or difference. Next, you'll apply your understanding of this critical issue to your reading of Blake's poem. Here's an example. I choose The Sick Rose as my poem. I'm interested in looking at the sick rose through the issue of subjectivity, the notion that a text interpretation is shaped by the situation in which it is read. As I read the poem, I look for places in which I'm encouraged to make choices in how I understand specific details. For instance, I can focus on the rose as a sympathetic character who is assaulted by the worm. Also, because of the cultural tradition in which I find myself in, I associate roses with love and worms with death. Because this same tradition generally assumes that the rose has a female identity, and then, therefore, worms have male identities, so the poem becomes a story about love and lust and female oppositions. As the rose is introduced first, I focus my attention on it. And as the rose is identified as being sick, I want to know why it's sick and how it might be made better. Because of the way I am introduced to the rose, I see the worm's presence as threatening, as a source of the rose's ills. This causes me to read specific details in the poem as supporting these assumptions, such as the worm flying in the night because it is up to no good, and the howling storm as representative of either, or even both, the violence of the worm or the pain of the rose. Now, this reading of the sick rose directly depends upon my identification of the rose as a sympathetic character. But suppose I instead identify with a worm. This would force me to reverse my reading of the rose as a sympathetic character, which in turn would lead me to a very different interpretation of the text. I would research what other critics might have said about the sick rose, not so much to find someone who might agree with my reading, but to place my reading within the context of a broader conversation. So, for instance, I might write something like, quote, Lindsay Grant sees The Sick Rose as a poem that describes a female characterized victimized or even assaulted by a male figure, while Corey Brown focuses on the poem's narrator and how he or she watches the worm attack the rose but does nothing to stop the situation. End quote. In this single short sentence, I managed to incorporate the critical perspectives of 2 other readers in the presentation of my understanding of the poem. And in terms of my specific presentation, I would quote words, phrases, and passages from Blake's poem to help illustrate my main point. Keep in mind that you don't have to identify the critical issue that you'll use to inform your reading, nor do you need to define it explicitly for your readers. Rather, use the critical issue as a way to help focus your ideas and make your interpretation the primary center of your essay. I hope this helps you get started. I'll send a more specific demonstration of what I'm looking for a bit later this week. Please take care.